The teardrops fell from her cheeks like rain from a summer storm, catching the golden sunlight as they descended onto the dusty planks of the general store porch. Wyatt Calloway stood transfixed, his hand frozen on the hitching post where he'd just secured his horse. He'd seen plenty in his 30 years gunfights, stampedes, the majesty of untamed frontier, but nothing had ever struck him like the sight of this woman's sorrow. Colorado Territory, 1875. The small town of Silverdale was barely a mark on the map, just a cluster of wooden buildings carved into the foothills of the Rocky Mountains where hopeful settlers and determined miners sought their fortunes. Wyatt hadn't planned to stay more than a night, just long enough to replenish supplies before moving his small herd further north. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, its white fabric stained with the remnants of previous tears. Her chestnut hair was pinned up beneath a modest bonnet, a few loose tendrils framing a face that Wyatt found immediately beautiful, despite the redness around her eyes and the tremble in her lower lip. "Madam," he found himself saying, hat already swept from his head and held against his chest. "Are you in need of assistance?" she startled, clearly not having noticed his approach. Her eyes a deep, rich brown that reminded him of fertile soil after rainfall widened as she regarded him. For a moment she seemed ready to dismiss him, but something in his expression must have communicated sincerity. "No, sir, She straightened her shoulders. "It's nothing that can be helped by a stranger." "Wyatt Calloway," he said, offering a slight bow. "Now we're not strangers anymore." Despite her distress, the faintest smile ghosted across her lips. "I'm Charlotte Brooks. Miss Brooks, I don't mean to intrude on your private sorrows, but I've found that sometimes the telling of troubles can lighten them, and I've been told I'm a fair listener." Charlotte seemed to consider this, her gloved hands folding and unfolding the handkerchief. Behind her, the general store door opened, and an elderly shopkeeper appeared, a wooden crate in his arms. "Miss Brooks, I'm afraid I can't extend any more credit. Times are hard for everyone." The old man's voice was apologetic but firm. "I understand, Mr. Finch," she replied, her voice steady despite the fresh glaze of tears. "I'll find another way." The shopkeeper disappeared back inside, and Charlotte turned to face Wyatt fully, a flash of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Now you know my troubles, Mr. Calloway. I'm a schoolteacher with too many hungry students and not enough resources to feed them. The town council has cut funding, and I've been using my own salary to provide meals for the children who come to school with empty stomachs." She lifted her chin slightly. "I don't regret it, but it seems I've reached the end of my means." Wyatt felt something stir within him, admiration, certainly, but something more, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Without hesitation, he reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "Take this," he said, extending his hand. "Consider it a donation to your school." Charlotte's eyes widened. "I couldn't possibly." "You can," he insisted gently, "and you will. Those children need to eat, and I've got more than enough for my needs at present." After a moment's hesitation, she accepted the pouch, her fingers briefly brushing against his. Even through the fabric of her gloves, Wyatt felt something akin to electricity at the contact. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. This is extraordinarily generous," he shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "It's just the right thing to do, Miss Brooks." She opened the pouch slightly, and her breath caught when she saw the collection of gold coins inside. "This is far too much for a simple donation. Consider it an investment in the future of Silverdale, then." He replaced his hat, tipping it slightly. "Good day, Miss Brooks." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Will you be staying in town long, Mr. Calloway?" He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. The tears had dried on her cheeks, and something that might have been hope brightened her eyes. In that moment, Wyatt Calloway knew his plans had changed. "I reckon I might," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "I find myself suddenly interested in what Silverdale has to offer." The next morning found Wyatt at the schoolhouse, a modest building at the edge of town. He'd spent the night at the local hotel, his mind occupied with thoughts of Charlotte Brooks and her plight. He'd risen before dawn, ridden to his camp where his ranch hand, Jacob, was watching over their small herd, and returned with a wagon loaded with provisions. Children were filing into the schoolhouse as he arrived. many thin and dressed in patched clothing. They eyed him curiously as he climbed down from the wagon. A moment later, Charlotte appeared in the doorway, a bell in her hand. She froze when she saw him. "Mr. Calloway, Miss Brooks," he greeted, removing his hat. "I thought your students might appreciate a proper breakfast before their lessons." Behind him, the wagon was stacked with sacks of flour, beans, smoked meats, fresh apples, and more. Charlotte descended the steps slowly, her expression shifting from surprise to a cautious joy that made Wyatt's heart beat a little faster. "How did you manage all this overnight?" "I have a small cattle drive camped a few miles outside town. My man Jacob helped me gather what we could spare." He gestured to the wagon. "It's not fancy, but it's good, filling food." Charlotte approached the wagon, running her fingers over a sack of flour. "This will feed them for weeks." "That's the idea." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Calloway?" "You don't know me or these children." Wyatt considered his answer carefully. "I know what it's like to go hungry, Miss Brooks, and I know what it's like when someone steps in to help without being asked." He nodded toward the schoolhouse. "Besides, seems to me anyone who'd spend their last penny feeding other folks' children deserves a bit of help themselves." Charlotte's smile, then, was the most beautiful thing Wyatt had ever seen, radiant and genuine, transforming her entire face. It struck him with the force of a physical blow. "The children and I would be honored if you'd join us for breakfast, Mr. Calloway." And so Wyatt found himself seated at a rough-hewn table in the schoolhouse, surrounded by 20 curious children ranging from 6 to 15 years of age. Charlotte had quickly organized them into a cooking brigade, and soon the room was filled with the aroma of flapjacks and fried bacon. As he watched her move among the children, patiently showing the younger ones how to flip the flapjacks without spilling batter, Wyatt felt something inside him shift and settle. He'd been drifting for years, moving his small herd from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments. But here, in this humble schoolhouse, he felt a connection he hadn't experienced since before the war. "Mr. Calloway is a cattle driver," Charlotte was explaining to the children as they ate. "He's brought his herd all the way from Texas. You kill outlaws, Mr." Asked a small boy with a mop of ginger hair. Wyatt chuckled. "No, son, I just move cows from one place to another." "But you got a gun," the boy persisted, pointing to the revolver holstered at Wyatt's hip. "James," Charlotte admonished gently, "it's not polite to point." "It's all right," Wyatt said. "Yes, I carry a gun. Out on the trail there are dangers, wild animals, sometimes rustlers. But a gun is a tool, not unlike your father's hammer or saw. It's to be respected and used only when necessary." The boy seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to his flapjacks with renewed enthusiasm. After breakfast, as the children settled into their lessons, Wyatt helped Charlotte clean up. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed plates and utensils. "You're good with them," Charlotte said finally. "The children, I mean." Wyatt glanced at the rows of students, heads bent over their slates. "They're good kids. Just need a chance, like we all do." "Will you tell me about yourself, Mr. Calloway? You seem to know my circumstances, but you remain a mystery." He dried his hands on a towel, considering. "Not much to tell, Miss Brooks. I grew up in Kentucky, fought for the Union in the war, came west afterward. Been driving cattle for nearly 10 years now. Family, lost my parents before the war, no siblings, no wife or children." He paused. "What about you? How did a lady like yourself end up teaching in a place like Silverdale?" A shadow passed over Charlotte's features. "I came west with my fiancé 3 years ago. He had dreams of striking it rich in the mines. Instead, he struck a vein of bad luck and disappeared with what little money we had saved." She shrugged, attempting nonchalance. "Teaching was the only respectable profession available to me. I've grown to love it, though. These children, they've become my family." Wyatt felt a surge of anger toward the man who'd abandoned her, followed by a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. "His loss," he said simply. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Charlotte was the first to look away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I should return to the lesson," she said. "Thank you again for breakfast. The children will remember your kindness for a long time." Wyatt nodded, replacing his hat. I'll be in town for a while. Perhaps I could bring more supplies in a few days. Charlotte's smile returned, warming him from the inside out. We would like that very much, Mr. Calloway. Wyatt, he corrected gently. Friends should use first names, don't you think? Charlotte, she offered in return, and the sound of her name in his own voice felt right somehow. As Wyatt left the schoolhouse, he found himself already planning his return. For the first time in years, he was thinking beyond the next cattle drive, beyond the next town. He was thinking of a future that might include staying put and a brown-eyed schoolteacher whose smile he was determined to see again. True to his word, Wyatt returned to the schoolhouse 3 days later, this time with fresh vegetables from a farmer outside town and a haunch of venison he'd hunted himself. Charlotte greeted him with evident pleasure, and the children clamored for stories of his adventures on the trail. After the school day ended, Charlotte accepted his invitation to dinner at the town's only restaurant, a modest establishment attached to the hotel. They talked for hours, discovering shared interests in literature and music. Charlotte confessed her dream of someday expanding the school to include a proper library. Books open worlds to these children that they might never see otherwise, she explained, her eyes alight with passion. Most of them will never leave this territory, but through reading, they can explore the entire globe, even travel through time. Wyatt found himself captivated not just by her beauty, but by her intelligence and determination. Here was a woman who had faced abandonment and hardship, yet had transformed her circumstances into something meaningful. As the days passed, Wyatt established a routine. Mornings were spent with his herd and Jacob. Afternoons often found him at the schoolhouse helping with repairs or teaching the older boys basic ranching skills. And evenings were dedicated to Charlotte walks along the creek that ran behind the town, quiet dinners, or simply sitting on the porch of her small rented cabin, talking until the stars filled the sky. He learned that she'd grown up in Boston, the daughter of a professor who'd encouraged her love of learning. He discovered that she could recite Shakespeare from memory and had once dreamed of being a writer herself. In turn, he shared stories of his childhood in Kentucky, his experiences during the war, though he kept the worst horrors to himself, and his dream of someday owning a proper ranch rather than continually driving cattle from place to place. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Wyatt arrived at the schoolhouse to find Charlotte sitting alone on the steps, her face troubled. The children had been dismissed for the day, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. Charlotte, what's wrong? He sat beside her, concerned by the return of the sadness he'd first witnessed. She sighed, handing him a letter. The town council. They've decided to close the school at the end of the month, funding cuts from the territorial government. Her voice trembled slightly. They're consolidating with Pinecrest. The children will have to travel 7 miles each way if they want an education. Wyatt read the official notice, anger building within him. This is ridiculous. Half these kids can't make that journey daily. They've got chores, responsibilities at home. I know, Charlotte's hands twisted in her lap. I've argued with the council, but their minds are made up. The silver mines are producing less, tax revenues are down. It's always about money. Wyatt's mind raced. There has to be something we can do. Unless someone has $300 to cover the school's operating costs for the next 6 months, I don't see a solution. Charlotte's shoulders slumped. I've offered to reduce my salary further, but Mr. Hargrove says it's not enough. Wyatt placed his hand over hers, stilling her nervous movements. I might have a solution. Her eyes lifted to his, hope warring with skepticism. What kind of solution? I need to check on something first. Can I meet you at your cabin in 2 hours? Charlotte nodded, and Wyatt squeezed her hand before standing. He had an idea, but it would mean changing his plans completely. As he mounted his horse and rode toward his camp, he realized he was surprisingly comfortable with that prospect. Jacob was mending a saddle when Wyatt arrived. The older man looked up, his weathered face curious. You look like a man with something on his mind, boss. Wyatt dismounted, accepting the cup of coffee Jacob offered. How would you feel about settling in one place for a while, maybe permanently? Jacob raised an eyebrow. Depends on the place, I reckon. You thinking of Silverdale, maybe? Wyatt stared into his coffee. There's a piece of land for sale just north of town. Good water, decent grazing. We could start small, build up the herd over time. A slow smile spread across Jacob's face. Wouldn't have anything to do with that schoolteacher you've been calling on, would it? Wyatt couldn't deny it. She's part of it. The school's in trouble, Jacob. Without funds, it'll close, and those kids will lose their chance at an education. Jacob nodded thoughtfully. My pa couldn't read nor write. Always said it was his biggest regret. He studied Wyatt's face. You're thinking of using the money from the cattle sale to save the school instead of buying more stock. Not all of it, but enough to keep the school open while we get established. Wyatt met his friend's gaze directly. It's your future too, Jacob. I won't make this decision without your agreement. Jacob chuckled. Boss, I've followed you through dust storms and river crossings. If you want to plant roots here, I'm with you. He paused. Besides, I ain't getting any younger. The idea of sleeping in the same bed more than 2 nights running has a certain appeal. Relief washed over Wyatt. Thank you, my friend. Don't thank me yet. Building a ranch from scratch is hard work. Jacob's eyes twinkled. Though I suspect you'll have help from a certain quarter. 2 hours later, Wyatt knocked on Charlotte's door, his heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting just inside. Come in, she said, gesturing to her small sitting room. Would you like tea? No, thank you. Wyatt remained standing, hat in hand. Charlotte, I have a proposition for you. Her eyebrows rose slightly. A proposition for the school, he clarified quickly. I can provide the $300 needed to keep it open. Charlotte's eyes widened. Wyatt, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly accept such a sum. It's not charity, he assured her. It's an investment in the community, a community I'm thinking of joining permanently. She stared at him, uncomprehending. What do you mean? I'm buying the Hollister place north of town. Jacob and I are going to start a ranch. The words felt right as he spoke them, confirming his decision. I'm tired of drifting, Charlotte. I want to build something lasting. She sank into a chair, her expression a mixture of disbelief and hope. You're staying in Silverdale. But your cattle drive. We'll sell the current herd in Denver as planned, but instead of heading south again, we'll come back here, use the profits to build the ranch. He took a deep breath. I'd like to establish a scholarship fund for the school as well. Ensure that no child is denied an education because of their family's circumstances. Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes, but these were different from those he'd first witnessed. These were tears of joy. Why would you do this? Wyatt knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. Because in 2 weeks I've come to care deeply for this town and its people. He paused, gathering his courage, especially one person in particular. Charlotte's breath caught. Wyatt. I know it's fast, he said quickly. I'm not asking for promises, just time. Time to show you that my intentions are honorable and my feelings sincere. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Wyatt reached up to brush it away with his thumb. The first time I saw you cry, it broke something in me, he admitted softly. All I've wanted since then is to see you smile. Charlotte turned her face into his palm, her eyes closing briefly. When she looked at him again, there was a warmth there that made his heart soar. You've given me more smiles in 2 weeks than I've had in 3 years, she whispered. And now you want to save the school and build a life here. She shook her head in wonder. It seems too good to be true. It's not, he promised. It's just the beginning. When her lips met his, tentative and sweet, Wyatt knew with absolute certainty that he had found his home at last. The news spread quickly through Silverdale. Wyatt Calloway, the cattle driver who'd appeared out of nowhere, was buying the old Hollister place and establishing a proper ranch. More surprisingly, he was providing funds to keep the school open, challenging the town council's decision to close it. Not everyone was pleased. Horace Hargrove, head of the town council and owner of the largest mining interest in the area, summoned Wyatt to his office just days after the announcement. You're interfering in town business, Calloway, Hargrove said without preamble, not bothering to rise from behind his ornate desk. The decision to close the school was made after careful consideration. Wyatt remained standing, his posture relaxed but alert. Seems to me education isn't something to be discarded at the first sign of economic trouble. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. What do you know about running a town? You're a drifter who's suddenly decided to play at being a community benefactor. I know that communities thrive when their children are educated, Wyatt replied evenly. And I'm not playing at anything, Mr. Hargrove. I intend to make Silverdale my home and contribute to its prosperity. The older man leaned forward, his voice lowering. Let me be plain. I control the water rights in this valley. The Hollister place has a good creek running through it now, but water can be redirected. Mining operations require substantial resources. The threat was unmistakable. Wyatt felt a cold anger settle in his stomach, but he kept his expression neutral. Are you suggesting you'd illegally divert water to prevent me from establishing my ranch? Hargrove smiled thinly. I'm suggesting that newcomers should understand the existing power structure before making grand gestures. The school closure is just the beginning of necessary economies. Silverdale is changing, Mr. Calloway. The boom days are over. All the more reason to diversify beyond mining, Wyatt countered. Ranching, farming, trade, they can sustain this town when the silver runs out. Quaint notions. Hargrove waved a dismissive hand. The school remains closed. Your money would be better invested elsewhere. Wyatt studied the man before him, recognizing the type. He'd encountered them throughout his travels, men who confused wealth with worth, who believed their financial power gave them the right to control others' lives. The territorial governor might be interested to know a town council is refusing private funding for education, Wyatt said quietly. Especially when that same council continues to approve tax breaks for mining operations. Hargrove's face darkened. Are you threatening me, Cowboy? Not at all. Just pointing out that power structures work both ways. Wyatt placed his hat on his head. Good day, Mr. Hargrove. I look forward to attending the next town council meeting as a property owner and taxpayer. As he left the office, Wyatt knew he'd made an enemy, but he'd faced worse odds before. And now he had something worth fighting for. Charlotte was waiting anxiously on the schoolhouse porch when he arrived. Classes had ended for the day and she'd been grading papers, though he suspected her mind had been elsewhere. How did it go? She asked as he climbed the steps. Wyatt shrugged. About as expected. Hargrove's not happy, but he's got no legal grounds to refuse the funding. Charlotte's relief was palpable. So the school stays open. The school stays open, he confirmed, smiling as joy transformed her face. Though I think we've got a battle ahead with the town council. Hargrove hinted at water rights issues for the ranch, her expression clouded. Horace Hargrove is used to getting his way. When the mines were producing, he brought prosperity to Silverdale, and people still defer to him because of it. She touched Wyatt's arm. Be careful, he can be vindictive. I'm not worried, Wyatt assured her, covering her hand with his own. Men like Hargrove rely on intimidation. When that fails, they usually back down. Charlotte didn't look convinced, but she squeezed his arm gratefully. Thank you for standing up for the school. The children were overjoyed when I told them we'd be staying open. Speaking of the children, Wyatt said, changing the subject, I was thinking we might organize an end-of-term celebration, something to mark the school's continuation and give them something to look forward to. Charlotte's eyes lit up. What did you have in mind? A picnic, perhaps? Games, music. We could invite the whole town, show them what they'd be losing if the school closed permanently. That's a wonderful idea, Charlotte clapped her hands together. We could have the older students present their projects, maybe perform a short play. Show the community what they're learning. Wyatt grinned, captivated by her enthusiasm. It's settled then. We'll have it at the ranch. By then, Jacob and I should have the main house and barn in livable condition. Are you sure? That's a lot of work on top of establishing the ranch, I'm sure. Wyatt took her hands in his. Charlotte, I want to be part of this community, really part of it. Not just the man who saved the school, but someone who contributes in meaningful ways. She studied his face, her expression softening. You're an extraordinary man, Wyatt Calloway. I'm just a man who knows a good thing when he sees it. He leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Both in terms of a town and its schoolteacher. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Wyatt and Jacob, along with hired help from town, worked from dawn till dusk repairing the buildings on the Hollister place. The previous owner had let everything fall into disrepair, before abandoning the property 2 years earlier, returning east after his wife died of fever. The main house was solid, but needed a new roof and extensive interior work. The barn required even more attention, with rotted support beams and missing wall planks. But day by day, the ranch began to take shape. Wyatt named it Evergreen, after the stand of tall pines that bordered the northern edge of the property. Charlotte visited whenever she could, bringing packed lunches and sometimes a few of the older boys who were eager to learn ranching skills. Wyatt observed how naturally she interacted with the children, her patience and genuine interest in their thoughts and questions. He found himself imagining a future where children of their own might run across these fields, and the thought both terrified and exhilarated him. One evening, as they sat on the newly rebuilt porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Charlotte broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. "Wyatt, people are talking about us," she said, her voice careful. "About the amount of time we spend together." He turned to look at her, noting the slight furrow between her brows. "Does that bother you?" "It's not that." She smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture he'd come to recognize. "It's just, as the schoolteacher, I'm held to certain standards of behavior. The school board, even with your funding, could dismiss me if they felt my personal conduct was improper." Wyatt felt a flash of anger at the unfairness of it, but he understood the reality she faced. Female teachers were often subject to strict moral clauses in their contracts. "What would make it proper in their eyes?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. Charlotte met his gaze directly. "Marriage, or at least a formal engagement." The word hung between them in the gathering twilight. They'd known each other barely a month, yet Wyatt couldn't imagine his future without her in it. Still, he hesitated. Was it fair to ask for such a commitment when his ranch was barely established, when they were still learning each other's hearts? "Charlotte," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I don't want you to feel pressured by town gossip or employment concerns. When I ask you to marry me, and I do intend to ask, I want it to be because we're both certain, not because circumstances forced our hand." A small smile played at her lips. "When, not if," he returned her smile, relieved by her reaction. "When? Definitely when. But not until Evergreen is properly up and running, not until I can offer you the home you deserve." Charlotte's expression grew serious. "Wyatt, I don't need a grand home or wealth. I've seen enough in my life to know that happiness doesn't come from possessions." "I know that," he said, taking her hand. "But I want to do this right. Give me a little more time to establish the ranch, to prove to both of us that I can be the partner you deserve." She nodded, her eyes soft in the fading light. "I can be patient, and in the meantime, perhaps we should be a bit more circumspect in our meetings, if that's what you need, of course." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Though I'll miss our evenings together." "As will I." Charlotte's free hand came up to touch his cheek. "But it won't be forever, just until things are more settled." As twilight deepened into night, they sat in comfortable silence, hands entwined, each lost in thoughts of the future they were building, step by careful step. The school picnic was scheduled for the last Saturday in May, coinciding with the completion of the main house and barn at Evergreen Ranch. Wyatt had worked tirelessly to ensure everything would be ready, even importing lumber from Denver, for the construction of picnic tables and benches that would remain as permanent fixtures for future gatherings. Charlotte had the children practicing their presentations and rehearsing a short play based on local history. The entire town was invited, with notices posted in the general store, the saloon, and even the mining office. It was to be a celebration not just of the school's continuation, but of community itself. The morning of the picnic dawned clear and warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers across the ranch. Wyatt stood on the porch, surveying his property with pride. In just a month, he and Jacob had transformed the neglected land into the beginnings of a prosperous ranch. A small herd of cattle grazed in the lower pasture, the first of many to come. The first wagons began arriving mid-morning, families from town dressed in their Sunday best, bringing covered dishes and eager children. Charlotte arrived with several of her students who lived in town, her face alight with excitement as she took in the decorations' colorful bunting strung between trees, tables laden with food, a makeshift stage for the children's performances. "Wyatt, it's perfect," she exclaimed, hurrying to his side. "I can't believe how much you've accomplished," he grinned, drinking in the sight of her. She wore a blue dress he hadn't seen before, her hair arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. "You look beautiful," he said simply. A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. It's not often a schoolteacher gets to dress for a special occasion." Before he could respond, they were surrounded by excited children and curious townspeople eager to explore the ranch. Wyatt found himself playing host, showing groups around the property, explaining his plans for expansion, answering questions about cattle breeding and water management. To his surprise, even Horace Hargrove made an appearance, arriving in a polished buggy driven by his personal assistant. The mining magnate surveyed the gathering with barely concealed disdain, but he accepted a plate of food and engaged in stiff conversation with several town council members. By early afternoon, the celebration was in full swing. Children ran races and played games organized by the older students. Parents and townspeople gathered in groups, talking and laughing, many seeing each other socially for the first time in months. The atmosphere was festive, a reminder of what community could be when people came together. The highlight of the day was the children's performance. On the simple wooden stage Wyatt had constructed, they presented a play depicting the founding of Silverdale, complete with homemade costumes and props. Charlotte stood to one side, prompting forgotten lines and beaming with pride as her students performed with enthusiasm if not polish. As Wyatt watched, he felt a deep contentment settle within him. This was what he'd been searching for all those years on the trail, not just a place to call home, but a purpose, a sense of belonging to something larger than himself. After the play, as people began gathering for the communal meal, Wyatt noticed a commotion near the creek that bordered the eastern edge of the property. A group of miners employed by Hargrove were arguing with Jacob, their voices rising in anger. Excusing himself from a conversation with the town doctor, Wyatt made his way quickly to the scene. As he approached, he could hear Jacob's controlled anger. "This is private property now. You can't just divert the water as you please." One of the miners, a burly man with a week's growth of beard, gestured angrily. "We've always used this creek for the mining operations. Hargrove says the water rights belong to the company." Wyatt stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Gentlemen, there seems to be a misunderstanding. When I purchased this property, the water rights were explicitly included in the deed." The miners exchanged glances. The spokesman eyed Wyatt suspiciously. Hargrove said, "Mr. Hargrove is welcome to examine the documentation," Wyatt interrupted smoothly. "In fact, why don't we ask him directly? He's here at the picnic." At the mention of their employer's presence, the miners' belligerence faltered. Clearly, they hadn't expected Hargrove to attend what they probably considered a frivolous social event. "That won't be necessary," said a new voice, and Wyatt turned to find Hargrove himself approaching, his assistant trailing behind him. "My men are simply following my instructions to assess the water flow for mining operations downstream." Wyatt met the older man's gaze steadily. "As I was explaining, the water rights for this property are legally mine. Any diversion would require my permission and appropriate compensation." Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, legal niceties must be observed. He turned to his men. "Return to the mine. We'll discuss this matter another time." The miners departed, grumbling among themselves. Hargrove lingered, studying Wyatt with calculating eyes. "You've created quite the spectacle here, Calloway. The whole town gathered on your property, eating your food, admiring your achievements." "It's a community celebration," Wyatt replied evenly. "Everyone is welcome. Yes, your generosity is much discussed." Hargrove's tone made the words an insult rather than a compliment. "Particularly your interest in our schoolteacher. Miss Brooks is well regarded in Silverdale. It would be a shame if her reputation were to suffer due to imprudent associations." The implied threat was clear. Wyatt felt his temper rise but kept his voice level. "Miss Brooks is a respected professional whose dedication to her students is beyond reproach." Anyone suggesting otherwise would find themselves facing serious consequences. Hargrove raised an eyebrow. Is that a threat, Mr. Calloway? A statement of fact. Wyatt stepped closer, lowering his voice. Let me be equally clear, Mr. Hargrove. Your attempts at intimidation, whether regarding water rights or personal matters, will not succeed. This is my home now, and I protect what's mine. The two men stared at each other, the tension palpable. Finally, Hargrove adjusted his jacket, a dismissive gesture. Enjoy your picnic, Calloway. Time will tell which of us has the stronger position in Silverdale. As Hargrove walked away, Jacob moved to Wyatt's side. That man's going to be trouble. He already is, Wyatt agreed grimly, but he's not the first bully I've dealt with, and I doubt he'll be the last. The confrontation had attracted attention, and as Wyatt turned, he saw Charlotte watching from a distance, concern evident in her expression. He forced a smile, not wanting to disrupt the day's festivities with Hargrove's threats. Rejoining the celebration, Wyatt did his best to put the incident aside. The remainder of the afternoon passed pleasantly, with music provided by a local fiddler and impromptu dancing on the grass. As evening approached and families began to depart, many stopped to thank Wyatt for his hospitality and to express their support for both the school and his new ranch. Charlotte stayed until the last guests had gone, helping to clean up despite Wyatt's protests that it wasn't necessary. As the sun began to set, they found themselves alone on the porch, Jacob having tactfully retired to his cabin after the last of the cleanup was complete. It was a wonderful day, Charlotte said, her voice soft with contentment. The children were so proud to show their parents what they've learned. Wyatt nodded, but his mind was still partly occupied with Hargrove's threats. Charlotte noticed his distraction and placed a hand on his arm. What happened with Horace Hargrove? I saw you talking by the creek. Briefly, Wyatt explained the confrontation over water rights and Hargrove's implied threats regarding Charlotte's reputation. As he spoke, her expression shifted from concern to indignation. That man, she said when he finished. He's ruled this town for so long he believes it's his right. When I first arrived in Silverdale, he offered me protection after my fiancée left. When I refused, he made sure the school board reduced my salary. Wyatt felt a surge of anger. He propositioned you, not directly. He's too clever for that, but the implication was clear. Charlotte's chin lifted defiantly. I've managed to keep my position through competence and by making myself indispensable to the children and their families. But Hargrove has never forgiven what he sees as a rejection. All the more reason to be cautious, Wyatt said. He's looking for any excuse to cause problems for both of us. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight gild the distant mountains. When she spoke, her voice was filled with a determination that matched his own. I won't let him intimidate me, Wyatt. And I won't let him drive a wedge between us. Wyatt turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Charlotte, I need to say something, and I hope you'll hear me out. She nodded, her eyes searching his face. I know we agreed to wait, to give ourselves time. But today, seeing you with the children, watching this community come together here at Evergreen, it clarified things for me. He took a deep breath. I love you, Charlotte Brooks. I think I've loved you since that first day on the general store porch. And while I can't offer you a finished home or guarantee that Hargrove won't cause us trouble, I can promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build a life with you, to make you smile every day for the rest of our lives. Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes, but unlike the first tears he'd witnessed, these shimmered with joy. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Wyatt smiled, releasing one of her hands to reach into his vest pocket. He withdrew a small, velvet pouch. I had this made in Denver before I sold the herd. From the pouch, he produced a simple gold band set with a single, perfect pearl. It's not a diamond, but it's beautiful, Charlotte whispered, her free hand coming up to cover her mouth. Wyatt dropped to one knee, still holding her hand. Charlotte Brooks, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, of making Evergreen your home, of building a life here with me? For a moment, she stood still, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Then, with a small cry, she pulled him to his feet and threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she breathed against his ear. Yes, Wyatt Calloway, I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Wyatt felt a completion he'd never known before. The wandering cowboy had found his home at last, in a place, and in the heart of a woman whose tears had changed the course of his life. The news of Wyatt and Charlotte's engagement spread through Silverdale with the speed of a prairie fire. Reactions were mixed. Genuine congratulations from many, particularly the families of Charlotte's students who had come to respect and appreciate Wyatt through his support of the school. Skepticism from others who thought the courtship too brief. And undisguised displeasure from Horace Hargrove and his associates. 3 days after the proposal, Wyatt accompanied Charlotte to a meeting of the school board, where she formally announced their engagement and addressed any concerns about her ability to fulfill her teaching duties as a married woman. "My commitment to the children of Silverdale remains absolute," she assured the 5 board members seated behind a long table in the town hall. Mr. Calloway shares this commitment as evidenced by his financial support of the school. Mr. Peterson, the banker who served as board chairman, smiled benevolently. "Speaking for myself, I see no issue with your continued employment after marriage, Miss Brooks. Your dedication has never been in question." 2 other board members nodded in agreement, but Hargrove, who held a seat by virtue of his status as the town's largest employer, leaned forward with a frown. "While I don't question Miss Brooks's dedication," he said, his voice carrying through the room, "I do wonder about the wisdom of such a hasty union. Mr. Calloway has been in our community for 6 weeks, hardly time enough to establish his character or intentions." Wyatt felt Charlotte tense beside him but kept his own expression neutral. This was her meeting, her profession at stake. "With all due respect, Mr. Hargrove," Charlotte replied evenly, "my personal life, while naturally of interest to the board in relation to my professional conduct, remains my own affair. Mr. Calloway has demonstrated his character through his actions, his support of the school, his establishment of a viable ranch that will contribute to the town's economy, and his consistent honesty in all business dealings." Peterson nodded, clearly eager to avoid conflict. "Well said, Miss Brooks. Unless there are specific objections related to professional conduct, I move that we accept Miss Brooks's notification and confirm her continued employment following her marriage." A vote was called, resulting in a 4-1 decision in Charlotte's favor, with only Hargrove dissenting. As they left the town hall, Wyatt squeezed Charlotte's hand. "You handled that beautifully." She smiled, though tension still lined her face. "Hargrove won't give up so easily. This is just the beginning of his opposition. Let him oppose all he wants," Wyatt said firmly. "We have right on our side, and increasingly the support of the town." The wedding was set for July, giving them time to properly prepare while allowing Charlotte to complete the school term. In the meantime, Wyatt focused on making Evergreen a functional ranch. He purchased additional cattle, hired 2 local men as ranch hands, and continued improvements to the property. Charlotte visited whenever her teaching duties allowed, often bringing students for informal lessons about ranching and agriculture. Wyatt enjoyed these visits immensely, discovering a natural talent for explaining complex concepts to young minds. Several of the older boys began stopping by after school to help with chores, eager to learn skills that might serve them in the future. One evening in late June, as Charlotte and Wyatt sat on the porch reviewing final wedding arrangements, Jacob rode in at a gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss," he called, dismounting before the horse had fully stopped. "The north pasture fence is cut. 8 head of cattle are missing." Wyatt was on his feet immediately. "Rustlers?" Jacob nodded grimly. "Tracks lead toward the hills. Looks like 3, maybe 4 men on horseback." Wyatt turned to Charlotte, who had risen beside him. "I need to go." "Of course," she said, concern evident in her eyes. "Be careful." He kissed her quickly, then strode toward the barn, Jacob following. Within minutes, they were mounted and armed, joined by the 2 ranch hands who had been alerted by Jacob's arrival. "We'll follow the tracks as far as we can before dark," Wyatt instructed as they rode out. "If we can't recover the cattle tonight, we'll camp and continue at first light." The trail was clear enough at first broken branches, hoofprints in soft earth, the occasional dropping from the stolen cattle. As they climbed into the foothills, however, the terrain grew rockier, making tracking more difficult. Twilight was fading into darkness when Jacob held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. "Campfire ahead," he whispered, pointing to a faint glow visible through the trees. Wyatt dismounted, motioning for the others to do the same. "We'll approach on foot. Stay low, stay quiet." They secured their horses and moved forward cautiously, using the trees for cover. As they drew closer, voices became audible: men laughing, the clink of cooking utensils, the lowing of cattle. From their vantage point behind a fallen log, Wyatt could see 4 men gathered around a fire. The stolen cattle were penned in a makeshift corral of ropes strung between trees. What caught his attention, however, was the brand visible on one man's saddle, a stylized H inside a circle. "Hargrove's men," he murmured to Jacob. The older man nodded grimly. "Recognized 2 of them from the mine, same ones who tried to divert the creek." Wyatt considered their options. They were evenly matched in numbers, but a direct confrontation could turn violent quickly. He had no desire for bloodshed, even to recover his property. "We wait," he decided. "Once they're asleep, we'll free the cattle and drive them back down." The hours passed slowly. One by one, the rustlers rolled into their blankets, leaving a single man on watch. As midnight approached, even the watchman's head began to nod. Wyatt signaled to his men. Silently, they crept toward the makeshift corral. Jacob and one ranch hand moved to cut the ropes while Wyatt and the other man stood guard, weapons ready. The operation was proceeding smoothly when a branch snapped underfoot. The watchman jerked awake, fumbling for his gun as he shouted an alarm. Instantly, the camp erupted into chaos. The other rustlers scrambled from their blankets, reaching for weapons. "Hold it right there," Wyatt commanded, his rifle aimed at the group. "We're just taking back what's ours." The leader of the rustlers, a man Wyatt recognized as Hargrove's foreman, sneered. "4 against 4, Calloway. You sure you want to try this?" "5 against 4, came a new voice, and Wyatt was stunned to see Sheriff Taylor step from the shadows, his revolver drawn. "And I've got the law on my side." The sheriff moved to stand beside Wyatt, caught wind of rustling activity in these hills, decided to investigate myself. He eyed the cattle and the Hargrove brand on the saddle. "Interesting situation we have here." The rustlers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly not having anticipated the law's involvement. "These men stole 8 head of cattle from Evergreen Ranch," Wyatt explained, not lowering his rifle. "Cut my fence to do it." Sheriff Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "Serious charges. Rustling carries a heavy penalty in this territory." He addressed the rustlers directly. "Drop your weapons, gentlemen. You're under arrest." For a tense moment, it seemed the rustlers might resist. Then, with a muttered curse, the foreman dropped his gun. The others followed suit. "This won't stick," the foreman growled as the sheriff bound his hands. "Mr. Hargrove will have us out by morning." "Maybe so," the sheriff agreed amiably, "but the charges will remain, and a record of Mr. Hargrove's men being arrested for rustling might interest the territorial governor, especially given Mr. Hargrove's ambitions for a seat on the territorial council." The implication was clear: even if Hargrove managed to free his men, the incident would damage his political aspirations. With the rustlers secured, Wyatt and his men recovered the cattle and began the journey back to Evergreen. Sheriff Taylor accompanied them, the prisoners walking beside his horse. "Thank you for your timely arrival, Sheriff," Wyatt said as they rode. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you know to be in these hills tonight?" Taylor smiled slightly. "Let's just say not everyone in Silverdale appreciates Hargrove's methods. When word reached me that some of his men were planning something against you, I decided to keep watch." Wyatt nodded, understanding the sheriff's discretion. "Well, I'm grateful, regardless of your source." They reached Evergreen as dawn was breaking. Charlotte, who had evidently spent the night waiting for Wyatt's return, ran from the house as they approached, relief evident in every line of her body. "You're safe," she breathed, embracing Wyatt as he dismounted. Then, noticing the sheriff and his prisoners, "What happened?" Briefly, Wyatt explained the night's events. Charlotte's expression hardened as she regarded the rustlers. "Hargrove," she said, the single word laden with contempt. "We can't prove he ordered it," Wyatt cautioned, "though I'd bet my ranch he did." Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat. I'll take these men to the jail. Mr. Calloway, I'll need you to come by later to make a formal statement." After the sheriff departed with his prisoners, Wyatt, Charlotte, and the ranch hands had a well-deserved breakfast. As they ate, Wyatt noticed Charlotte's thoughtful expression. "What's on your mind?" he asked quietly. She met his gaze, her eyes troubled. "This isn't over, Wyatt. If anything, it will make Hargrove more determined to drive you out." "I know." He covered her hand with his own. "But we're not alone in this fight. The sheriff's involvement proves that." Charlotte nodded, though her worry remained evident. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Hargrove didn't build his empire by playing fair. I promise." Wyatt squeezed her hand. "Besides, in less than 2 weeks you'll be Mrs. Calloway. After that, nothing Hargrove does can touch us." Her smile then was worth every hardship, every risk. It reminded him of why he'd stayed in Silverdale, why he'd chosen to build a life here. For that smile, he would face 100 Hargroves. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer morning that seemed designed for beginnings. Evergreen Ranch had been transformed for the occasion, with wildflowers decorating the yard and ribbons adorning the fence posts. A simple arch, constructed by Wyatt and covered in local blooms by Charlotte's students, stood in the center of the yard where the ceremony would take place. Wyatt, dressed in a new suit ordered from Denver, paced nervously in the barn where Jacob had insisted he remain until the ceremony. "Bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," the older man had declared, appointing himself guardian of tradition. "She is coming, right?" Wyatt asked for the third time, adjusting his tie yet again. Jacob rolled his eyes. "For the last time, yes, Mrs. Peterson drove out to fetch her an hour ago. They'll be here." He regarded his friend with amusement. "Never thought I'd see the day when Wyatt Calloway, who stared down a stampeding herd without blinking, would be this nervous over a woman." Wyatt managed a rueful smile. "Not just any woman." "Charlotte, true enough," Jacob conceded. He peered out the barn door. "Looks like folks are arriving. Best compose yourself, boss." Indeed, wagons and riders were appearing on the road to the ranch, bringing what seemed to be the entire population of Silverdale. The rustling incident had unexpectedly galvanized public opinion in Wyatt's favor, with many townspeople openly choosing sides against Hargrove for the first time. Attendance at the wedding had become something of a political statement. At the appointed hour, Jacob escorted Wyatt to the arch, where Reverend Simmons waited, Bible in hand. The yard was filled with guests seated on benches constructed for the occasion, their faces friendly and expectant. A hush fell over the gathering as Mrs. Peterson's wagon appeared, driven now by Mr. Peterson while his wife presumably helped Charlotte prepare in the house. Wyatt's heart pounded as he waited, his eyes fixed on the front door. When it opened, revealing Charlotte in a simple but elegant white dress, a wreath of wildflowers crowning her upswept hair, Wyatt felt as though all the air had been knocked from his lungs. She was radiant, her face glowing with happiness as she made her way toward him, a bouquet of local blooms in her hands. The ceremony itself passed in a blur for Wyatt. He was vaguely aware of the Reverend's words, of the responses he and Charlotte made, of the ring he placed on her finger beside the pearl engagement ring. But mostly, he was aware of Charlotte, her warm hand in his, her eyes meeting his with such love and trust that it humbled him. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Simmons declared. "You may kiss your bride." As Wyatt's lips met Charlotte's, sealing their union, the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. In that moment, surrounded by the community they had helped to strengthen, on the land they would cultivate together, Wyatt knew he had found something more precious than he had ever dared to dream. The celebration that followed was joyous and uninhibited. Tables laden with food prepared by the women of Silverdale lined one side of the yard. A local trio of musicians played lively tunes that soon had people dancing on the grass. Children ran and played, their laughter adding to the festive atmosphere. Conspicuously absent was Horace Hargrove, though no one seemed to regret this. His foreman and the other rustlers remained in jail, awaiting trial in the territorial court. The sheriff had confided to Wyatt that even Hargrove's influence wasn't enough to dismiss charges of cattle rustling. especially with multiple witnesses. As the afternoon progressed, Wyatt and Charlotte moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and good wishes. Charlotte's students presented them with a handmade quilt, each square containing a design representing something the child had learned that year. It was a touching gift that brought tears to Charlotte's eyes. "We'll treasure this always," she told the children, embracing each one. "And you'll always have a place at Evergreen, whenever you want to visit." Later, as the sun began to set and the celebration showed no signs of winding down, Wyatt led Charlotte away from the crowd to a quiet spot near the creek. They sat on a fallen log, Charlotte's head resting on Wyatt's shoulder, watching the water flow past. "Happy, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, still marveling at the reality of their marriage. "Completely," she sighed, nestling closer. "Though I keep thinking about that first day when you found me crying on the porch, if you hadn't stopped. I couldn't have done anything else," he admitted. "Something about your tears. They called to something in me I didn't even know was there." Charlotte lifted her face to his. "And now you've given me more reasons to smile than I can count." Wyatt brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "That's my lifelong mission now, you know, to keep that smile on your face. You're off to an excellent start." Her eyes sparkled with happiness and a hint of mischief. "Though I hope you know that marriage won't always be as perfect as today." "I'm counting on that," he said seriously. "It's in the imperfect days that we'll build our strength together." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Charlotte, I want you to know something. Before I met you, I was just existing, moving from place to place without purpose. You've given me not just a reason to stay, but a reason to build, to grow, to become more than I was." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were the kind he'd come to cherish, tears of joy, of being moved by emotion too deep for words. "And you, Wyatt Calloway, have shown me that trust and love are still possible, even after disappointment. You've restored my faith in good men and happy endings." Their kiss was tender, a promise of all the days to come. When they returned to the celebration, hand in hand, they were greeted with knowing smiles and good-natured teasing. The party continued well into the night, with lanterns illuminating the yard as guests danced and socialized, reluctant to see the joyful day end. It was nearly midnight when the last guests departed, leaving Wyatt and Charlotte alone at last in the house that was now truly their home. As they stood on the porch, watching the last wagon disappear down the road, Wyatt slipped his arm around his wife's waist. "Welcome home, Charlotte Calloway," he murmured, savoring the sound of her new name. She turned in his embrace, her eyes luminous in the moonlight. "Home," she repeated softly. "I've been searching for that all my life, it seems, and here it was waiting for me in Silverdale." "Not just Silverdale," Wyatt corrected gently. "Here at Evergreen, with me." Her smile then, tender and full of promise, was everything he had ever hoped to see. As he lifted her into his arms to carry her over the threshold, Wyatt knew with absolute certainty that the journey that had begun with a stranger's tears had led him exactly where he was meant to be. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to Wyatt and Charlotte Calloway. Evergreen Ranch prospered, gradually expanding as Wyatt purchased adjacent land and increased his herd. The small two-bedroom house grew as well, with additions to accommodate their growing family. Their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, arrived 10 months after their wedding, bringing a new dimension of happiness to their lives. Wyatt, who had feared he might not know how to be a father having lost his own so young, discovered a natural talent for parenthood. He delighted in every aspect of his daughter's development, from her first smile to her first steps. Charlotte continued teaching for a year after Elizabeth's birth, bringing the baby with her to school. Her students adored the infant, and the older girls learned practical childcare skills that would serve them well in their own futures. When Charlotte discovered she was expecting their second child, however, she reluctantly resigned her position. "It's not forever," Wyatt assured her, seeing her mixed emotions. "Just until the children are older, and in the meantime, you can still influence education in Silverdale." Indeed, Charlotte's influence continued through her position on the school board, which she joined shortly after her resignation from teaching. Under her guidance, The curriculum expanded to include practical subjects like agriculture and home economics alongside traditional academic studies. Their second child, a son they named William after Wyatt's father, arrived in the spring of 1878. He was followed 2 years later by another boy, James. Each addition to the family brought new joy to Evergreen, filling the house with laughter and the chaos that comes with young children. Silverdale itself changed over the years. The silver mines eventually played out as Wyatt had predicted, forcing the town to diversify its economy. Many miners moved on, seeking new strikes elsewhere, but others stayed, transitioning to farming, ranching, or various trades. The town's population stabilized at around 500 souls, making it a respectable community in the increasingly settled territory. Horace Hargrove's influence waned with the decline of mining. After the rustling incident and the subsequent conviction of his men, his reputation never fully recovered. When the territorial governor appointed a commission to investigate corruption in mining operations, Hargrove hastily sold his interests and relocated to San Francisco, leaving behind a community that quickly adapted to his absence. Wyatt became a respected figure in the region, known for his fair business practices and willingness to help neighbors in need. When drought threatened local farms in 1882, he opened Evergreen's pastures to their livestock and shared water from the creek that Hargrove had once threatened to divert. When asked why he would help potential competitors, Wyatt's answer was simple. "A community thrives together or fails together. I choose thriving." Charlotte, too, earned respect beyond Silverdale. Her educational initiatives attracted attention from territorial officials, and she was eventually appointed to a committee developing standardized curricula for schools throughout Colorado. Her occasional absences for these duties were fully supported by Wyatt, who managed both ranch and children with the help of trusted employees during her travels. "Your mother is changing the world," he would tell the children proudly when they missed her. "And she'll bring all her adventures back to share with us." As the children grew, they became integral to life at Evergreen. Elizabeth, intelligent and thoughtful like her mother, developed a passion for books and learning. William, more like his father, showed an early aptitude for ranching and the outdoors. James, the youngest, combined traits from both parents, equally at home with a book or on horseback. One evening in the summer of 1885, as Wyatt and Charlotte sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Charlotte reached for her husband's hand. "Do you ever think about that first day?" she asked softly. "How different our lives might have been if you hadn't stopped to help a crying woman." Wyatt squeezed her hand, his eyes following the children's game of tag. "Sometimes, but then I think it couldn't have happened any other way. I was always meant to find you." Charlotte leaned against his shoulder, contentment in every line of her body. "Remember what you promised. That you'd spend your days making me smile, I remember," he said, turning to look at her beloved face, now showing the first fine lines of approaching middle age, beautiful to him as ever. "Have I kept that promise?" Her smile then was answer enough, radiant with the accumulated happiness of their years together. "Every single day, Wyatt Calloway, every single day." As twilight deepened into evening, they called the children in for supper, moving from the peace of the porch to the cheerful chaos of family life. The table was laden with food from their own garden and livestock, the room bright with lantern light and alive with conversation and laughter. This was the life they had built together, from that chance encounter on a dusty porch, a life rich not in silver or gold, but in the more precious currencies of love, purpose, and belonging. Wyatt, watching his wife and children as they shared the day's stories, felt a gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. The wandering cowboy who had once drifted aimlessly across the frontier had found his true north in a schoolteacher's tears, and in his quest to replace those tears with smiles, had discovered the greatest treasure of all, a home where he was truly needed, truly valued, truly loved. In the years that followed, as their children grew and Evergreen prospered, Wyatt and Charlotte faced the inevitable challenges of life together: illness, occasional financial hardships during lean years, the normal conflicts that arise between two strong-willed individuals sharing a life. But through it all, they maintained the connection that had begun on that spring day in 1875, when a cowboy had been unable to pass by a woman's sorrow without stopping to help. By the turn of the century, Evergreen Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the region, known for its quality livestock and progressive farming methods. Their children were grown Elizabeth married to a professor at the newly established university in Denver, William managing much of the ranch's daily operations, and James studying medicine in Boston with plans to return and establish a practice in the growing town of Silverdale. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire community gathered at Evergreen to celebrate. The ranch yard, expanded over the years to accommodate such gatherings, was filled with friends, neighbors, former students, and their families. 3 generations danced to music provided by a proper band, enjoying food prepared by a community that had grown and thrived partly due to the Calloway's influence. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Wyatt led Charlotte away from the celebration to the creek, where they had stolen a quiet moment on their wedding day. The fallen log was long gone, replaced by a comfortable bench Wyatt had built when they began making this spot a regular retreat from the demands of ranch and family life. 25 years, Charlotte mused as they sat together, her hand naturally finding his as it had countless times over the decades. Sometimes it seems like yesterday that you found me crying on that porch. Wyatt lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the gold band that had never left her finger. Best day of my life, though I didn't know it at the time. And the smile you put on my face that day has never truly faded. She leaned against him, her body fitting perfectly against his side as it always had, even through the hard times. Especially through the hard times, he corrected gently. That's when smiles matter most. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the music and laughter from the party, the endless murmur of the creek, the rustle of leaves in the light evening breeze. Their life together had been built of such moments, quiet companionship balanced with the joyful chaos of family and community, work and rest, giving and receiving. I've been thinking, Charlotte said finally, about the school. Wyatt turned to look at her, noting the familiar spark in her eyes that always appeared when she was planning something. What about it? Silverdale has grown so much. The current building is overcrowded and the curriculum needs updating again. She straightened, her enthusiasm evident. I think it's time for a proper academy, not just elementary education, but secondary as well. Prepare our young people for university or professional training. Wyatt grinned, not surprised by her continuing ambition for the town's educational system. And you want to lead this effort? I do. She met his gaze directly. The Territorial Education Board would provide partial funding, but we'd need local support as well. Significant support, he understood immediately. Evergreen support. Only if you agree, she said quickly. It's your hard work that's built this ranch. Our hard work, he corrected, taking both her hands in his. Everything we have, we've built together, Charlotte, and I can't think of a better legacy than expanding education in the community that's given us so much. The joy that illuminated her face then was worth any price. It was the same joy he'd first seen when he'd offered her that pouch of gold coins so long ago, the joy of knowing she could help others, could make a difference in the world. The Calloway Academy, she said, testing the name. For all children, regardless of their parents' means. With scholarships for those who need them, Wyatt added, already warming to the idea. And practical training alongside book learning, Charlotte laughed, the sound as delightful to him as it had been when he first heard it. Listen to us, planning the future again. Some might say we should be slowing down at our age. Not us, Wyatt declared, pulling her close. Not while there are still smiles to be created, still good work to be done. They returned to the celebration hand in hand, renewed in their shared purpose, their commitment to each other and to the community they had helped to build. As they rejoined their family and friends, accepting congratulations and reminiscing about the past quarter century, Wyatt felt the same certainty that had guided him since that first day, that in Charlotte's smile lay his true purpose, his deepest joy, his most enduring legacy. And in the years that followed, as the Calloway Academy rose on the outskirts of Silverdale, as their grandchildren began to fill Evergreen with a new generation's laughter, as Colorado transitioned from territory to state, and the frontier gave way to settlement, Wyatt and Charlotte continued to build their life together. They faced each new challenge and celebrated each new joy as they had from the beginning side by side, hand in hand, their love deepening with every passing season. For the cowboy who had once been content to drift with the wind had found his anchor in a schoolteacher's tears, and in his quest to replace those tears with smiles, had discovered a happiness beyond anything he could have imagined on that spring day in 1875 when he first stopped to help a crying woman on a dusty porch in a silver mining town called Silverdale.